Coming up on this week's episode, we give the shady side of science our full attention this week. We talk about our favorite science scams, and we ask a scientist if those genetic testing sites are worth looking into. All that and more on this episode of We Come From the Future. This episode of We Come From the Future is sponsored by Audible.com. Hello, and welcome to We Come From the Future, the show where we stand outside the future's house holding up a boombox and hoping it'll change its mind about breaking up with us. I'm Annalee Newitz.
And I'm Esther Inglesarkel. This week we're talking about science scams. Despite fact-checking and peer review, there are plenty of times when a scientist has pulled the wool over society's eyes. And we're going to attempt to take the wool off and burn it.
We like burning. There have been a lot of science scams in history, and usually they're perpetrated by pretty reputable scientists, people who know their stuff are just good at sounding plausible enough to make the public believe and other scientists believe. For example, William Summerlin was a medical researcher who claimed he'd perfected tissue transplants between unrelated mice. So he showed his colleagues white mice with transplants from black mice, so little white mouse with little black patches. Except the problem was, they weren't really transplants. They were white mice whose fur he had colored in with magic marker. So basically the phrase painting the mice is the scientific equivalent of jumping the shark.
But the granddaddy of all these schemes is the autism is caused by vaccines scam, which was perpetrated by Andrew Wakefield. He said he published a study with about 12 patients that indicated that vaccines cause gastroenterological problems that then cause autism in young children. Turned out he had done things like pick people deliberately who had autism, pay kids at his son's birthday party $8 for blood samples, and falsified and just made up some results. Now, autism caused by vaccine, the idea, has caused chelation therapy, which is injections of acid into people. It has led to bleach enemas given to autistic children, basically just torturing autistic kids, as well as a drop in vaccination worldwide, which leads to a lot more sickness. This guy, extreme douche canoe, really deserves to be held up as the, I guess, icon of all scientific scammers.
Totally. Those frauds were uncovered in the past, but are you being ripped off right now? We talked to a geneticist about those genetics test services like 23andMe that you see online and find out if they're worth it.
We hear a lot about genetic testing, like 23andMe.com's personal genome sequencing. But it can be hard to tell what's based on legitimate science and what isn't. Here to help answer our questions about it is Gary Karpen, Life Sciences Division Director at Berkeley Lab. So what does it mean to do a genetic test on someone? What's involved?
Well, basically you have to get some kind of tissue from the person first, some cells, and this is usually done through blood. And then you need to extract the DNA and then either subject it to DNA sequencing or some other kinds of tests that tell you what kinds of markers there are within a person's DNA. So what I mean by markers is what 23andMe does, for example, which is they don't look at every base. They look at what are called polymorphisms or SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. And these cover about only 0.1% of the genome, or 1 in 1,000.
So if they're covering 0.1%, would you say 23andMe or other sequencing services like it are worth it, not worth it?
So it depends on what your question is. So it's...
Well, what can they actually tell?
So SNP mapping, looking at this 0.1% of the genome, actually gives you what are called association information. That is, if you look at the entire population of humans, then what you can find is that a particular type of polymorphism, a particular change at a particular base, is frequently associated with, let's say, breast cancer. That's different from a mutation in a gene that can directly lead to, let's say, breast cancer or some other kind of disease. It's an association, a genetic association. These two traits tend to go together throughout the population. But it's still very useful information. It tells you a number of things. One thing that it tells you, not related to health so much, is what your genealogy is. So SNP mapping, this looking at these specific markers at 0.1% of the genome, can tell you a lot about your ancestry.
What traits do you think will be an absolute certainty? For example, could you tell that your son or daughter would have a high IQ if you had all possible information about their genes?
Right. I would say the clear answer is no. Certain things are absolutes. Again, I'll go back to Tay-Sachs or similar types of definitive diseases. If you have a mutation in that gene, both copies of that gene, then you'll essentially die within 3 or 4 years. That's a very clear-cut case. When it comes to human behavior, human intelligence, the role of genetics is very complicated and unclear. It's often the case that if you can identify genes involved in mental ability or mental illness, it's one of many that can be identified by genetic testing, and it's never so far been shown to be an absolute.
How will genetics be able to cure disease instead of just predicting it? Is there any way to do that?
Currently, gene therapy, so the ultimate goal, one would hope, would be that you could actually, if you know, we'll go back to Tay-Sachs, that you have a fetus with Tay-Sachs, that you could actually go into that embryo and change the gene so that you don't have a mutation in the Tay-Sachs gene. There was a recent paper from an investigator at Stanford who sequenced his own genome, Mike Snyder is his name, and what he found was that he had a mutation in a gene that would give him a predisposition to type 2 diabetes. Now, he had shown no symptoms at all, but having that knowledge led him to do blood tests every 2 or 3 months, and they could identify the precise time at which he started to develop diabetes. And so what he did was to be able to treat that with exercise and diet, rather than waiting until a time when it had progressed so far that there was tissue damage and much more long-term consequences. So that's just one example of how you can use that kind of information to know you have a predisposition, and then use sort of standard medicine to help with that.
Thanks for joining us today and helping us out. And now it's time to thank one of our sponsors.
Audible.com is the leading provider of downloadable digital audiobooks and spoken word entertainment. With over 100,000 titles to choose from, Audible.com makes reading convenient and fun whether you're commuting to work or flying out to outer space. Choose from books in every genre, including science fiction, thrillers, drama, comedy, business, history, and more. And this includes Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, which is one of my picks for awesome summer science fiction reading. You can go to audiblepodcast.com/future to get a free audiobook download of your choice when you sign up today. Again, go to audiblepodcast.com/future for your free audiobook. And now we take a look at things we wish were a fraud on Doom of the Week.
It began quietly with reports of a squid dish inseminating a woman's mouth. When people looked into the phenomenon, they found out that there were more incidents. How does it happen? We have a video. Now take a look at how you're going to die via squid babies bursting out of your mouth.
So what you're seeing here is actually what happened in the woman's mouth. Basically, this is the spermatophore, which is a little packet holding the sperm, and here this is what it does when it burrows into the skin of a squid, which is how squids inseminate each other.
Or
they
in
shoot
this
each
case,
other
into her cheek.
Right. So this is,
and I think tongue.
Yeah, and because there's a bunch of them, right? So see, this is all the spring-loaded action of like sort of sticking all that sperm. So right now, this is just a kind of the encased sperm.
That is not okay.
Burrowing into her cheek, and see how the sperm's getting all spring-loaded up? And pretty soon, bursts open. So now all the sperm's floating into your mouth or your squid friend.
And that, okay, see this?
What is that?
That looks like
the
a crazy straw.
Final burst. It's like crazy straw in reverse. Like, And that's why you should probably be removing the organs of the squid before you pop it in your mouth.
Really cook it.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all the bad science we can stomach, metaphorically, this week. Remember to search for IO9 to find us on iTunes and subscribe to us on YouTube. And as always, you can watch us here on revision3.com.
I'm Annalee Newitz.
And I'm Esther Inglis Arkell. And we'll see you next week in the future.